The smell
You
hit
can't just
first,
leave it like this.
sharp,
I've done all I
sweet,
can.
unmistakable. Bacon fat sizzling in a cast iron skillet
The
at
test results are
6:42 in the
back.
morning.
But you'll
The
need
sound
time.
came next,
We're
that
right here
familiar
with you.
American
It hurts so
breakfast
much.
Rest now.
symphony of meat
The latest
crackling over high
intelligence
heat,
confirms enemy
the kind of
positions
sound
here.
that had
What are
woken
the
up
casualty
farm boys
projections?
and
Higher
factory
than
workers
expected. We need
and
to act
soldiers
now.
for generations. But this was April 7th, 1946, Fort Bragg, North Carolina. And the man in bed number 7 of the burn ward couldn't smell anything anymore, couldn't hear the bacon, couldn't feel much beyond the fire eating through his right arm and shoulder, spreading toward his heart like poison ivy climbing a fence post. Private Tommy Bradley had 72 hours to live. The doctors had tried everything. Sulfa drugs that had saved thousands during the war, silver nitrate solutions, petroleum-based dressings, every miracle of modern medicine that 1946 had to offer. And the infection kept winning, kept spreading, kept turning healthy tissue green and black and rotten. But on that April morning, something impossible was about to happen in the Fort Bragg burn ward. Something that would save not just Bradley's life, but the lives of 200 American soldiers after him. It started with an enemy and a grandmother's recipe for honey. The woman's name was Elena Hoffman, 34 years old, German military nurse, prisoner of war. She'd been in America for 6 weeks, assigned to kitchen duty at the Fort Bragg hospital. Every morning at 5 a.m. she reported to peel potatoes and wash dishes. Just another enemy doing labor. Just another mouth to feed until the repatriation ships could take her back to whatever was left of Germany. The hospital staff barely saw her. She kept her head down, hands busy, spoke maybe 10 words a day in heavily accented English. In 6 weeks, she'd become part of the furniture, as invisible as the mop buckets and supply carts. But Elena had been watching, listening, learning the rhythms of American military medicine, the way doctors talked in hushed voices outside the burn ward, the frustration that crept into their conversations when another boy didn't make it through the night, the desperation in their eyes when they stood at the nurses' station staring at charts that told them everything they were doing was failing. She knew something they didn't, something her grandmother Ilse Hoffmann, born 1875 in a village outside Munich, had taught her before modern medicine existed, before anyone had words like bacteria or pH or osmosis, before the world had split into enemies and allies. Old knowledge, forgotten knowledge, the kind that lived in clay jars and calloused hands and whispered recipes passed from grandmother to granddaughter, like heirlooms. During the war, when Elena worked in German field hospitals and the supplies ran out, no morphine, no bandages, no sulfa drugs, she'd use that honey mixture, spread it on burns that should have killed strong men, watched it work when nothing else would, saved 52 soldiers from infections that modern medicine called hopeless, lost only 2, never told anyone, never wrote it down. Because who would believe that 300 years of Bavarian folk wisdom could beat American antibiotics? But now in this North Carolina hospital, she heard the same desperation she'd heard in Germany, saw the same helplessness, watched young men die from wounds that her grandmother could have healed with a wooden spoon and a ceramic bowl. And she had to make a choice. Stay silent, stay safe, stay invisible, or speak up, risk everything. Trust that somewhere in this country that had bombed her homeland to ruins, there might be one doctor humble enough to listen to an enemy. The choice came on April 6th, late evening, 8:15 p.m. Elena was alone in the kitchen washing the last of the dinner pots. Big steel things that weighed 20 pounds when full. Her hands were raw from hot water and lye soap, red and cracked and aching. Outside in the hallway, footsteps. Then a voice. Dr. William Crawford, head of surgery, 43 years old, Johns Hopkins Medical School class of 1928, 15 years practicing medicine, 8 years as an Army surgeon, a man who had saved hundreds of lives during the war. He wasn't talking to anyone, just muttering to himself, the way a man does when he's given up. Mitchell died this morning. Peterson won't make it through the night. Bradley's got maybe 3 days, 15 beds, 15 boys, and I can't save a single one of them. Elena's hands stopped moving in the dishwater. She'd heard that tone before. In German field hospitals, 1944, when the supplies ran out and the wounded kept coming. The sound of a doctor who'd run out of options, who'd done everything his training taught him and watched it fail anyway. That's when she made her choice. She dried her hands on her gray work dress, walked to the doorway. Dr. Crawford was standing in the hallway with a cup of cold coffee staring at nothing. Doctor, sir. He turned, looked surprised like he'd forgotten other people existed in the world, like he'd been talking to ghosts. The burn patients. Elena's accent made it sound like the burn patients. I may know something that could help. Silence dropped between them like a stone into deep water. Crawford just stared at this German woman, this prisoner, this kitchen worker whose name he probably didn't even know. And Elena thought he's going to laugh. He's going to walk away. He's going to report me for insubordination, and I'll spend the rest of my time here scrubbing floors instead of washing dishes. But what Crawford said was different. I'm listening. Two words that changed everything. Elena took a breath. You are using sulfa drugs for the infections. Yes. Silver nitrate, petroleum dressings. Crawford nodded slowly. They are not working, Elena said. The bacteria have become resistant. I have seen this before during the war. We've tried everything modern medicine has, Crawford said. There's nothing left. There is something left, sir. Elena's voice was quiet but steady. My grandmother was a healer in Germany. She taught me traditional methods for treating burns and infections, methods that work when modern medicine fails. Crawford's expression shifted. Something between hope and skepticism. Traditional methods. You mean folk remedies? I mean treatments that saved lives during the war, sir. When we had no antibiotics, no modern supplies. Treatments my grandmother learned from her grandmother, passed down for hundreds of years. What kind of treatments? Elena hesitated. This was the moment, the point of no return. Honey, sir. Medical honey mixed with specific herbs. Applied directly to burns. It prevents infection, promotes healing, reduces scarring. My grandmother used it for 70 years. I used it during the war. It works better than your petroleum dressings. Better than silver nitrate. Crawford's face went very still. Honey. You want me to put honey on third-degree burns? Not just honey, Elena said quickly. Medical preparation. Specific mixture. Specific herbs. Calendula for inflammation. Comfrey for tissue regeneration. Plantain for infection. But yes, the base is honey. That's not how modern medicine works, Crawford said. His voice was flat. We don't use food products as medical treatments. Elena felt something sharp rise in her chest. Years of watching men die, years of staying silent, years of knowing she could help but being too afraid to speak. With respect, doctor, she said, and her voice came out sharper than she intended, modern medicine is letting your soldiers die. The words hung in the air between them. Crawford's jaw tightened. Elena waited for him to turn away, to end this conversation, to put her back in her place. Instead, he said something she didn't expect. You sound like my grandmother. Lena blinked. Sir, my grandmother, Crawford said slowly, was a healer. Midwife, Appalachia, used all kinds of herbal remedies. My father hated it, said it was superstition. Hillbilly medicine. He paused, looked at Elena directly. But I saw her save a woman's life once. Postpartum hemorrhage. Nothing the doctor could do. My grandmother used some kind of herb tea. Yarrow, I think. The bleeding stopped. The woman lived. Your grandmother knew the old knowledge, Elena said softly. Like mine. Crawford was quiet for a long moment. Elena could see him wrestling with it. His training told him to dismiss her. 15 years of medical school and surgical residencies and peer-reviewed journals. But something else was pulling at him. Some memory of watching his grandmother work miracles with plants and prayers. Explain it to me, Crawford said finally. The medical basis. Why honey would work when sulfa drugs don't. Elena had prepared for this question. Her father had been a doctor. She knew how to speak the language of science. Honey has natural antibacterial properties, sir. It creates an acidic environment and pH around 3.5. Most bacteria cannot survive an acid. It also has very low water content. This draws fluid out of wounds through osmosis, dehydrates the bacteria, kills them without chemicals they can become resistant to. And the herbs, calendula reduces inflammation, contains compounds that calm angry tissue. Comfrey accelerates regeneration. It has allantoin, a substance that promotes new cell growth. Plantain fights infection naturally. These are not superstitions, sir. These are plants with real medicinal properties. We just forgot them when we invented antibiotics. Crawford stared at her. How many soldiers did you treat with this method? 52 burn cases during the war, Elena said. Only 2 deaths, both from injuries too severe for any treatment to save. The others recovered, full recovery, some in half the time that standard treatments required. 96% survival rate, Crawford said quietly. Better than anything we're seeing now. Because the bacteria have learned to fight your drugs, sir. But they cannot learn to fight honey, cannot adapt to acid and dehydration and multiple mechanisms at once. Silence again, but different this time. Thoughtful, calculating. Why didn't you mention this before, Crawford asked. Lena looked down at her hands, red and raw from dishwater. Hands that had held soldiers as they died. Hands that could have saved them if she'd just been brave enough to speak. Because I am a prisoner, sir. An enemy. Who would listen to me? Who would trust me? I thought it better to stay quiet. But you're speaking up now. Because soldiers are dying, sir. And I know I can save them. And staying quiet while men die, that is worse than the risk of speaking. Crawford was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Then he nodded once. Show me. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Bring whatever you're talking about. Let me see it before we try anything on a patient. Elena felt something loosen in her chest. Hope and fear and relief all tangled together. Thank you, doctor. I will not let you down. Don't thank me yet, Crawford said. I'm not promising anything. I just want to see what you're talking about. If it's nonsense, we stop there. Clear. Clear, sir. Crawford turned to leave, then stopped, looked back. What's your name, Elena Hoffman, sir? Well, Miss Hoffman, you've got 12 hours to convince me that 300 years of grandmother's wisdom can beat Johns Hopkins medical training. He walked away. Elena stood alone in the empty kitchen, realizing what she'd just done. She'd challenged authority, offered to teach American doctors something they didn't know, put herself on a path that would either save lives or end very badly for her. There was no middle ground. That night, Elena worked alone in the hospital kitchen. The building was quiet. Most of the staff had gone home. Only the night nurses and a skeleton crew remained keeping watch over patients who slept fitfully or not at all. She'd requisitioned what she needed earlier. 1 jar of pure honey from the supply pantry. Not medical grade, but pure North Carolina clover honey. It would work. Fresh calendula flowers from the kitchen garden. Bright orange petals that stained her fingers yellow when she touched them. Comfrey leaves rough and hairy. Plantain, the broad-leafed weed that grew everywhere but that most Americans considered worthless. The making of the salve was a ritual, sacred in the way that old knowledge is sacred, passed down not through books but through hands, through doing, through the muscle memory of women who'd healed their villages for centuries. First the calendula. Elena crushed the flowers in a stone mortar and pestle. The smell filled the small kitchen. Sweet, slightly spicy, like chamomile but sharper. The petals released golden oil that stuck to the pestle, coating it like liquid sunshine. Then the comfrey. She chopped it fine with a paring knife. Each cut released a green scent. Earthy, alive. The kind of smell that reminded you of spring rain on garden soil, of things growing, of life pushing up through dirt toward light. The plantains she tore by hand. Never use metal on plantain, her grandmother had said. It bruises the medicine out. So Elena's fingers worked the leaves, tearing them into small pieces, releasing their essence, their healing. Then the honey, American honey, lighter than the dark forest honey from Bavaria, but pure, golden, thick as molasses in winter. She poured it into a ceramic bowl, watched it move slowly, heavily, like amber-colored glass flowing downhill. The ratio had to be exact. Her grandmother's voice in her head clear, as if Ilse Hoffman was standing right there in the Fort Bragg kitchen. 3 parts honey, 1 part calendula, half part comfrey, quarter part plantain, more and it won't spread, less and it won't heal. Elena mixed everything together. Her hands worked the ingredients, folding, combining, watching the golden honey turn amber, then golden brown, watching the herbs distribute evenly through the thick mixture. The smell changed as she worked, became something complex. Flowers and earth in summer meadows, and 300 years of accumulated wisdom. The final mixture was thick, spreadable but substantial. It looked like nothing modern medicine would recognize. No chemical smell, no sterile appearance, just plants and honey and hope. It looked like what it was. Old knowledge meeting its moment. Elena covered the bowl with a clean cloth, set it aside, let it rest. The herbs needed time to release their compounds into the honey. 30 minutes, her grandmother had said. Not more, not less. Time for the medicine to wake up. She cleaned her workspace, washed the mortar and pestle, wiped down the counter, put away the supplies, made the kitchen look like nothing had happened, like she'd just been washing dishes and going about her evening routine. But everything had changed. In 12 hours, she would show Dr. Crawford this mixture, this grandmother's medicine, this impossible answer to a modern problem, and he would either laugh at her and send her back to potato peeling, or he would let her try to save 15 dying boys with honey. Elena didn't sleep that night, just sat in her barracks bunk listening to the other prisoners snore and shift and dream of home, thinking about tomorrow, about Private Bradley in bed 7, about the infection spreading toward his heart, about the 72 hours he had left, about her grandmother who died in 1940 during an Allied bombing raid on Munich, who'd spent 70 years healing people with plants and prayers and patience, who'd never written down her recipes because she believed knowledge lived in hands, not books. I hope I remember everything correctly, Grandmother Elena whispered into the darkness. I hope I can do this right. 6 a.m. came too quickly and too slowly at the same time. Elena arrived at the storage room off the main ward carrying her ceramic bowl. The honey mixture had rested overnight, settled, became itself. She lifted the cloth and checked it. Perfect, golden brown, smelling of flowers and healing. Dr. Crawford arrived at 5:58, 2 minutes early. He looked like he hadn't slept either. Dark circles under his eyes, wire-rimmed glasses slightly crooked, coffee stain on his white coat. This is it, he asked, looking at the bowl. Elena held it up carefully. This is the treatment, sir. Applied directly to clean burns, covered with light cotton gauze. Changed every 12 hours. The honey must remain moist so the gauze should not be wrapped tightly. Crawford leaned in, smelled it. His nose wrinkled slightly. It smells like he paused, searching for words like my grandmother's kitchen in summer. And something shifted in his face. Some wall coming down, some memory rising up. The smell of healing. The smell of old women who knew things doctors didn't. That's what sold him. Not the science, not the logic, the smell. The memory of his own grandmother saving lives with herbs while his father muttered about superstition. Explain it to me again, Crawford said. The medical basis. Why this would work when sulfa drugs fail. Elena had her answer ready. Honey creates an acidic environment, sir. pH around 3.5. Most bacteria cannot survive an acid. It also has very low water content. This draws fluid out of wounds through osmosis, dehydrates the bacteria, and there's an enzyme glucose oxidase. When honey is diluted by wound fluid, this enzyme produces hydrogen peroxide, slowly, continuously. Natural antiseptic released directly into the wound over time. Crawford nodded slowly. Processing. And the herb's calendula reduces inflammation, contains anti-inflammatory compounds. Comfrey accelerates tissue regeneration. It has allantoin, which promotes cell growth at the molecular level. Plantain has natural antimicrobial properties, compounds that kill bacteria through different mechanisms than your antibiotics. So even if bacteria are resistant to sulfa drugs, Elena continued, they cannot be resistant to all of this at once. Acid, dehydration, hydrogen peroxide, multiple plant compounds. It is too many attacks from too many directions. Crawford set the bowl down on the metal table, crossed his arms, looked at Elena directly. You learned all this from your grandmother. She learned it from hers. Who learned it from hers? The knowledge goes back centuries, sir, before we had names for things like pH and osmosis and allantoin. But it worked then, and it works now. And you're certain it will work on our patients. Elena thought about the 52 soldiers she treated during the war. Thought about the 2 who died both with burns covering more than 60% of their bodies. Thought about the 50 who'd lived, who'd healed faster than anyone expected. who'd gone home to wives and children and futures they shouldn't have had. I am certain, sir. I have done this many times. I know what will happen. Crawford was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. If I try this, and I mean if it will be unofficial, one patient, controlled conditions, and if anything goes wrong, if the patient gets worse, we stop immediately. Understood? Understood, sir. Private Bradley. Bed 7. He's the worst case, infection spreading despite maximum sulfa treatment. I give him 3 days, maybe less. He's already accepted that he's dying. Elena's heart sank. Starting with the worst case was dangerous. If she failed with Bradley, Crawford would never trust her methods again. But she also understood. If it worked on Bradley, it would work on anyone. I can save him, she said. I know I can. Then let's find out if you were right. They walked together to the burn ward. Early morning light coming through the high windows. The smell of antiseptic and infection and despair. 15 beds, 15 young men in various stages of dying, some asleep, some staring at ceilings, some too far gone to do either. Private Tommy Bradley was in bed 7, 22 years old, farm boy from Dayton, Ohio. He'd survived the war, D-Day, France, Belgium, Germany, came home without a scratch, started training as a demolitions instructor. Then a phosphorus grenade malfunctioned during a demonstration 3 days ago, and now he was here, dying in peacetime, dying from an accident, dying despite everything modern medicine could offer. His eyes were closed when they approached. Fever, bright skin, breathing shallow, the bandages on his right arm and shoulder stained with drainage, the smell coming off him sweet and rotten at the same time. Private Crawford said gently. Bradley's eyes opened, unfocused, morphine glazed. We've tried everything standard medicine has to offer. Crawford continued. Nothing's working. This woman, Miss Hoffman, she has a treatment. Traditional medicine, based on natural remedies. I want your permission to try it. Bradley looked at Elena, really looked at her, saw her gray POW dress, her German features, her foreign face. Will it hurt? His voice was barely a whisper. It should not hurt, Elena said, her accent thick but her English clear. It may feel cooling, soothing. Bradley thought about it, or tried to. The morphine made thinking hard, made everything soft and distant and dreamlike. Doc, he said finally, I got maybe 2, 3 days left anyway. Right? Crawford nodded, couldn't bring himself to lie. Then do it, Bradley said. What have I got to lose? Everything, Elena thought. Or nothing, depending on whether I remember my grandmother's teaching correctly. She stepped forward, began to work. Elena's hands moved with the kind of certainty that comes from doing something many times before. First, she cleaned Bradley's wounds. Saline solution from a metal basin. Sterile gauze from a package that crackled when she opened it. Her touch was gentle but firm, confident. The touch of someone who knew what needed to be done. Bradley gasped. The pain cut through the morphine fog like a knife through butter. His whole body went rigid. I am sorry, Elena said quietly. This part is necessary. I must see what we are working with. She peeled away the old petroleum dressings. They came off sticky and foul-smelling. Underneath, the burns looked terrible. 3rd degree. Down through skin into muscle. Some areas black with dead tissue. Necrotic. Others green with infection. Pus oozing from the edges where healthy tissue met destroyed tissue. The smell hit both Elena and Crawford at the same time. Sweet and rotten. The smell of a body eating itself. Elena had seen worse. During the war, she treated soldiers pulled from burning tanks, men whose skin had melted off, whose bones showed through charred flesh. This was bad, very bad, but it was survivable. If the honey worked. She dipped 2 fingers into the ceramic bowl. The mixture was cool, thick, sticky. It coated her fingers like amber-colored glue. She brought it to Bradley's shoulder, spread it gently across the largest burn area. Bradley's face changed instantly. It's cold, he said, surprise in his voice. Doesn't hurt. Actually feels. He paused, searching for the word good. The honey was doing exactly what honey does, drawing heat out of inflamed tissue, creating that cooling sensation. Working on a molecular level that Bradley couldn't understand and Crawford didn't fully believe in yet, but working nonetheless. Elena continued. Methodical, thorough. She covered every burned area, thick layer, like frosting a cake, her grandmother used to say. Make sure every bit of damaged tissue touches the medicine. No gaps, no shortcuts. The honey will do its work, but only if you let it reach what needs healing. The golden brown mixture spread across Bradley's shoulder, down his arm, covering the angry red and black and green landscape of his burns, transforming it into something that looked almost peaceful, almost hopeful. Crawford watched in silence, making mental notes, observing technique, looking for anything that might cause harm. But Elena's movements were practiced, professional. This was not some folk healer waving herbs and muttering incantations. This was a trained nurse applying a treatment she'd used successfully dozens of times. Once every burn was covered, Elena reached for the cotton gauze. Light weave, breathable. She laid it gently over the honey-covered areas. Not tight, she said to Crawford, demonstrating. The honey must remain moist. If we wrap too tightly, it dries out. Stops working, just enough to keep the honey in place and protect from contamination. How long do we leave it? Crawford asked. 12 hours. Then we remove the gauze gently. Clean with saline. Apply fresh mixture. The old honey will look different, darker, with fluid drawn into it. That is good. It means the honey is pulling infection out of the wounds. And we do this for how long? For burns this severe, 7 to 10 days. Maybe less if healing progresses quickly. Maybe more if complications arise. But I will know. The tissue will tell us what it needs. Crawford made notes on Bradley's chart. 12-hour intervals, honey application. Observe for changes. If condition worsens, discontinue immediately. He looked at his watch. 6:45 a.m. 12 hours from now would be 6:45 p.m. evening rounds. He'd check then, see if there was any change, any improvement, any reason to believe that this impossible treatment might actually work, or any reason to stop it and go back to watching Private Bradley die slowly. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Elena returned to the kitchen, peeled potatoes, washed dishes, went through the motions of her assigned duties while her mind stayed in the burn ward, counting hours, calculating what should be happening under that honey and gauze dressing. The glucose oxidase enzyme would be activating now. Contact with wound fluid triggering the chemical reaction, producing hydrogen peroxide, slow release, continuous, killing bacteria that had grown resistant to sulfa drugs. The osmotic pressure would be drawing fluid from the swollen tissue, reducing inflammation, pulling infection toward the surface where it could drain away instead of spreading deeper. The calendula compounds would be calming the angry tissue, telling inflamed cells to stand down, to stop attacking, to start healing instead. The comphrase allantoin would be encouraging new cell growth, signaling the body that it was safe to rebuild, that the danger was passing, that life could begin again at the edges of death. All of this happening invisibly, microscopically. While Bradley slept and Crawford made his rounds, and the hospital went about its daily business of trying to keep broken soldiers alive. At noon, Elena saw Crawford in the hallway outside the kitchen. He was walking quickly, purpose in his stride. She caught his eye. He gave a small shake of his head. Too early to tell. No change yet. Just wait. At 3 p.m., Crawford checked on Bradley again. Took temperature, pulse, respiration, looked at the honey-covered wounds through the gauze, wrote everything in his notes, said nothing to the nursing staff who asked questions with their eyes. At 6 p.m., Elena finished her shift. She should have returned to the POW barracks, should have eaten dinner with the other German prisoners, should have followed protocol and routine. Instead, she waited in the kitchen, cleaning things that were already clean, organizing supplies that were already organized, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 6:45. At 6:42, Crawford appeared in the doorway. "Come with me," he said. They walked together through the hospital corridors, past the surgical ward, past the recovery rooms, past the offices where paperwork piled up like snowdrifts. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was their footsteps on polished linoleum and the distant murmur of a radio playing somewhere. The burn ward was quiet. Most of the patients were asleep or trying to sleep. Pain medication and exhaustion and hopelessness making a powerful sedative. Bradley was in bed 7. His eyes were closed, his breathing steady. Crawford approached first. Elena hung back, giving the doctor space to make his own observations. Crawford checked Bradley's forehead, pulled out his penlight, checked pupil response, took pulse at the wrist, made notes. His face revealed nothing. Then he reached for the bandages. Elena held her breath. Crawford cut away the gauze carefully. It peeled back easily. Not stuck, not dried out. Good sign. The honey underneath had changed color. Darker now, brown instead of golden, fluid mixed in, clear and slightly cloudy. Exactly what Elena had said would happen. Crawford leaned in, examined the wounds closely. His hand went to his glasses, adjusted them, looked again. His breathing changed, got faster, shallower. "Miss Hoffman," he said quietly, "come here." Elena stepped forward, looked at Bradley's burns in the evening light coming through the ward windows. The change was subtle but undeniable. The green tinge of infection had faded. Not gone, but definitely less. The tissue looked cleaner, less angry. The swelling had decreased, the edges of the burns less inflamed, and the smell had changed from putrid rotting flesh to something almost sweet, honey and herbs and the first hint of healing. "What do you see?" Crawford asked. "I see the honey working," Elena said simply. "The infection is being drawn out. The inflammation is decreasing. This is exactly what should happen after 12 hours. Crawford said nothing for a long moment, just stared at the wounds, at the impossible improvement, at the evidence that 300 years of grandmother's wisdom might actually be right and Johns Hopkins might actually be wrong. "We apply fresh mixture," Elena said. "Same amount, same technique, another 12 hours. Crawford nodded slowly. "Do it." Elena worked quickly, cleaned the wounds gently with fresh saline. The old honey washed away easily, revealing tissue that looked better than it had that morning. Definitely better. She applied new honey mixture, fresh gauze, secured it loosely. Bradley stirred. His eyes fluttered open. "Doc." His voice was weak but clearer than it had been that morning. "How do you feel, son? Better?" Bradley's face showed surprise, like he couldn't quite believe what he was saying. "A lot better. The pain is less. He moved his arms slightly. "I can move without wanting to scream." Crawford's hand trembled slightly as he made notes on the chart. Elena saw it. The tremor of a man whose entire understanding of medicine was being challenged by a German prisoner and a jar of honey. "Get some rest," Private Crawford said. "We'll check on you in the morning." As they left the ward, Crawford stopped in the hallway, turned to Elena. His face was a war between professional skepticism and undeniable evidence. "This is not possible," he said. "It is happening, doctor. 18 hours, one treatment, and he's better, measurably better." "Yes, sir." Crawford ran a hand through his gray hair. "I need to show this to Dr. Richardson, the chief of surgery. He'll want to see the patient. The results." Elena felt cold fear slide down her spine. Dr. Richardson, she'd seen him in the hallways. Tall, stern, by the book. The kind of man who would not take kindly to a German POW telling American doctors how to practice medicine. "Is that wise, sir?" she asked quietly. Crawford looked at her. "I don't have a choice. If this works, if this actually works, it's too important to keep quiet. Richardson needs to know, and if he says to stop, then we stop." Crawford's voice was firm. "I won't risk a patient's life on an unsanctioned treatment, no matter how promising. But I also won't let Bradley die without giving this a real chance." The next morning, 7 a.m., Elena was summoned to Dr. Richardson's office. She'd never been in the administrative wing before. Carpeted floors instead of linoleum. Wood paneling instead of white-painted walls. The smell of coffee and pipe tobacco instead of antiseptic. Crawford was already there. Standing, tense, Dr. Richardson sat behind a massive oak desk. 52 years old, silver hair, hard eyes. The kind of eyes that had seen everything and were impressed by nothing. "Miss Hoffman," Richardson said. His voice was ice-wrapped in courtesy. "Sit." Elena sat, kept her hands folded in her lap, kept her eyes respectful but not subservient. "Dr. Crawford tells me you've been treating burn patients with honey." "Yes, sir." Honey, Richardson's tone made it sound like an accusation. "A food product, based on advice from He glanced at a file on his desk, a prisoner of war with no medical credentials recognized by the United States Army. I was a nurse in the German military medical corps, sir. 4 years in field hospitals. And you learned this honey treatment from my grandmother, sir. She was a healer in Bavaria. A healer, Richardson repeated. Not a doctor, not a nurse, a healer. Elena felt anger rise in her chest but pushed it down. She had learned to swallow anger, to smile and nod and survive. But something in Richardson's dismissive tone made her grandmother's voice rise up strong. My grandmother saved more lives than most doctors, sir. For 70 years, using knowledge passed down through centuries. Knowledge, Richardson said, or superstition. The difference is results, Elena said quietly. My grandmother's patients lived. That is not superstition. That is medicine. Silence dropped like a hammer. Crawford shifted uncomfortably. Sam, he said, look at the results. Private Bradley was dying, septic. 3 days maximum. I tried everything we have. Nothing worked. So you turned to honey, Richardson said, without authorization, without proper protocols, without any scientific basis. With a 96% success rate during wartime field conditions, Crawford shot back. 52 cases treated, 50 recovered. That's not folklore, that's data. Richardson stood, walked to the window, looked out at Fort Bragg, at the parade ground where young men marched in formation, at the flag snapping in the April breeze, at the carefully ordered world of military medicine that he'd spent 20 years building and defending. When he turned back, his face was granite. Here's what's going to happen. You continue the honey treatment on Bradley. You document everything, every measurement, every observation, every change, hourly if necessary. He looked at Crawford, and you expand it. 5 more patients, the worst cases in the burn ward. If they all improve, we'll discuss making this official. If even one gets worse, if there's any indication this honey is causing harm, we stop immediately and report this to Army Medical Corps as an unauthorized experiment. Clear, Crawford nodded. Crystal clear. Richardson turned to Elena. And Miss Hoffman, you will train our nursing staff on this preparation method. If this works, it's because of a reproducible technique that any competent nurse can perform, not because of some German mysticism that only you possess. Understood? Understood, sir. I will teach them exactly as my grandmother taught me. Every measurement, every step. Good. Now get out of my office. I have real medicine to practice. They left in silence. In the hallway, Crawford let out a long breath. He's starting to believe, Crawford said. He just doesn't want to admit it yet. Elena smiled slightly. My grandmother used to say the hardest patients to heal are doctors. Their minds are sick with certainty. Crawford laughed, a short, sharp bark of surprised laughter. Your grandmother was a wise woman. By mid-morning, word had spread through the hospital. The German prisoner had some kind of treatment. The dying soldiers were getting better. People wanted to see for themselves. Dr. Richardson tried to keep it quiet, tried to maintain protocols. But you can't hide hope, not in a place where hope is in short supply. Nurses whispered to orderlies. Orderlies whispered to other doctors. Other doctors came to look. By afternoon, Crawford had selected the 5 worst cases for Elena's honey treatment. Sergeant Marcus Chen, 28, Chinese-American from San Francisco. Chemical burns on both hands from a fuel explosion. Hands wrapped so thick with bandages, he looked like a boxer. Couldn't feed himself, couldn't write letters home. Infections spreading up both wrists toward his elbows. Private David Walsh, 21, Irish kid from Boston. Thermal burns across his back from a kitchen grease fire. Couldn't lie down, couldn't sit properly. Spent his days leaning forward in a special chair trying not to touch anything with his ruined back. Corporal James Rivers, 25, from rural Georgia. Phosphorus burns like Bradley's but worse. Right side of his face, neck, shoulder. Couldn't turn his head, couldn't see properly from his right eye because of the swelling. Kept asking the nurses if he'd still be able to see when it healed. Nobody wanted to answer him. Private First Class Robert Hayes, 19, youngest in the ward. Electrical burns on chest and arms from a generator accident. Burns that went deep into muscle and nerve. His fingers didn't work right anymore. Doctors had told him even if he survived, he might never regain full function. Lieutenant Frank Morrison, 31, officer, vehicle fire, burns on legs and lower torso, married, 3 kids back home in Michigan. He'd seen the infection starting 2 days ago, knew what it meant, had already written final letters to his wife. 5 men, 5 last chances, 5 lives hanging on honey and herbs and a German grandmother's wisdom. Elena trained the nurses that afternoon in the hospital conference room. 6 American women ranging from mid-20s to late 40s, women who'd worked in military hospitals during the war, who'd seen terrible things, who'd developed their own ways of dealing with death and injury in the endless parade of broken boys. The dynamic was complicated. 3 of these nurses had brothers who'd fought in Europe. One had lost a fiancé at the Battle of the Bulge. Another's father had been at Pearl Harbor. And here was a German woman telling them how to do their jobs. Head nurse Margaret O'Brien spoke first. 48, Boston Irish. No nonsense. Been a nurse for 23 years. Miss Hoffman O'Brien said, "I've been doing this longer than you've been alive. Never heard of treating burns with honey. That is because modern medicine forgot," Elena said simply. But the old knowledge is still true. Nurse Patricia Henderson, 32 from Texas, leaned forward. "My grandmother used honey on cuts. Said it kept them from getting infected." "Your grandmother was right," Elena said, and something shifted in the room. That small connection, that bridge between what doctors knew and what grandmothers knew. "Henderson is right. The science now understands why honey works. But the wisdom has always known." Elena showed them the preparation. Let them touch the mixture, smell it, feel the consistency, explained each herb's purpose in language they could understand. Not folk tales, not mysticism, real explanations about inflammation and cell growth and bacterial inhibition. "How thick should we apply it?" Henderson asked. "Like frosting on a cake," Elena demonstrated. "Thick enough to cover completely, but not so thick it cannot penetrate the damaged tissue." "And we really don't wrap the gauze tight?" O'Brien asked. "No, ma'am. The honey must stay moist. Tight wrapping dries it out. Stops the healing. Light coverage only." Nurse Jennifer Wu, 26 from California, raised her hand. Her parents had been in the internment camps. She understood what it meant to be seen as the enemy. Miss Hoffman Wu said, "The doctors say bacteria are becoming resistant to sulfa drugs." "Will they become resistant to honey too?" Elena shook her head. "No, bacteria can learn to fight specific chemicals, adapt their cell walls, change their metabolism. But honey kills in many ways at once. Acid environment, dehydration, hydrogen peroxide. Multiple plant compounds with different mechanisms. To become resistant to all of those bacteria would have to stop being bacteria, would have to fundamentally change what they are. And that is impossible." The nurses looked at each other. This made sense, more sense than they wanted to admit, but sense nonetheless. That evening, Elena applied honey treatment to all 5 new patients. Chen first. His hands were terrible. Worse than Bradley's burns in some ways. The chemical had eaten through skin and into the small bones. But Elena worked carefully, thoroughly. Covered every damaged area with her golden brown mixture. Walsh next. His back was a landscape of destroyed tissue. Elena had to help him lean forward while she worked, spreading honey across burns that covered his shoulder blades, his spine, his lower back. He hissed with pain when she cleaned the wounds. But when the cool honey touched his skin, he sighed with relief. Rivers. The phosphorus had done what phosphorus does, burned deep and kept burning. His face was almost unrecognizable, swollen, distorted. But Elena saw past the damage to the person underneath. Young man from Georgia, scared, in pain, hoping against hope that this German woman with her strange treatment might give him back his future. Hayes, 19 years old. Electrical burns were different from thermal or chemical. They followed the path of current through the body, created strange patterns of damage, deep injuries with relatively normal-looking skin on top. But Elena had seen electrical burns before, knew how to work with them, applied honey to every visible burn site and some areas that didn't look burned, but probably had internal damage. Morrison last, the officer. The married man with 3 kids, the one who'd already made peace with dying. Elena saw it in his eyes when she approached his bed. that acceptance, that quiet surrender. But she also saw Hope trying to fight through. Saw him looking at Bradley, who was now sitting up in bed, eating solid food, talking to the other patients. Saw Morrison thinking maybe there's still a chance. Elena worked on Morrison's legs and lower torso. Burns from a vehicle fire. Fuel burns, deep and extensive, but not unsurvivable. Not if the honey worked. When she finished with all 5 patients, it was nearly midnight. Elena was exhausted. Her hands ached. Her back hurt from bending over beds all evening. But she felt something else too. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She was doing what she was meant to do. What her grandmother had trained her to do. What all those years of learning and practicing and perfecting had prepared her for. Saving lives. Crawford found her in the ward washing her hands in the small sink. "You should rest," he said. "Tomorrow will be a long day. Tomorrow will tell us if this works," Elena said. "If 5 patients can improve like Bradley did. And if they don't," Elena dried her hands on a clean towel, looked at Crawford directly. "Then you go back to what you were doing before, and I go back to peeling potatoes. And these soldiers die. But at least we tried. At least we gave them a chance when modern medicine had given up." Crawford nodded slowly. "Get some sleep, Miss Hoffman. We'll check on them in the morning." But Elena didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. Just lay in her barracks bunk listening to the night sounds of Fort Bragg. Distant trucks, guard patrols, a radio playing somewhere far off, and thought about 6 soldiers whose lives depended on whether she'd remembered her grandmother's teachings correctly. Whether 300 years of folk wisdom could stand up against 6 different cases of infection in 1946 America. Whether an enemy could save the sons of the people who'd bombed her homeland to ashes. The answer would come in 18 hours, and the world would either change or stay exactly the same. Dawn came slowly on April 10th. Elena was already awake when the first light touched the windows of the POW barracks. She'd been awake for hours, watching the darkness fade to gray, listening to her own heartbeat, counting down the minutes until she could return to the burn ward and see if the impossible had happened again. 6 men, 6 different cases, 6 chances for her grandmother's medicine to prove itself or fail spectacularly. She dressed in the same gray work dress she wore every day, washed her face in cold water from the communal basin, walked across Fort Bragg in the early morning chill. April in North Carolina, still cold before the sun got high. Her breath made small clouds in the air. The hospital was quiet. Night shift ending, day shift beginning. That in-between time when the building itself seemed to hold its breath. Crawford was already in the burn ward, standing at Bradley's bedside, writing notes. He looked up when Elena entered, gestured for her to come closer. Bradley was sitting up, actually sitting up in bed, reading a letter from home. His right arm, the one that had been covered in 3rd-degree burns just 2 days ago, was moving. Not perfectly, not without pain, but moving. The bandages were clean, white, no drainage, no smell of infection. "Morning, Doc," Bradley said. His voice was strong, clear, the voice of a young man who'd decided he was going to live after all. "Morning, ma'am," Elena nodded, smiled slightly. "How do you feel, Private?" "Like I might actually see my girl again," Bradley said. "Like I might get to go home." Crawford made a note on his chart. Temperature normal, pulse strong, appetite good. Patient consumed full breakfast. Infection markers decreased significantly. Continue honey treatment for another 48 hours, then reassess. They moved to the next bed. Sergeant Chen, the man with the ruined hands. Elena approached carefully. Chen was Chinese-American, had faced prejudice his whole life. Seen as foreign, as other, as not quite American despite being born in San Francisco, despite serving his country, despite bleeding the same red blood as everyone else. "How are your hands?" Sergeant Crawford asked. Chen held them up. The bandages were lighter now, not the thick boxing glove wrappings from yesterday. He flexed his fingers, slowly, carefully, but they moved. "I can move them," Chen said. His voice cracked with emotion. "I can feel them. Doc, yesterday I couldn't feel anything below my wrists. Today I can wiggle my fingers." Elena unwrapped the bandages. The honey underneath had done its work. The chemical burns that had been eating through skin and into bone had stopped spreading. The edges of the wounds showed pink new tissue. Healing, actually healing. The honey is working, Elena said quietly. The infection is clearing. Give it 3 more days and you will have much more function. 3 more days, Chen repeated, like he was trying to believe it, like he was afraid to hope too hard. They moved through the ward, patient by patient, bed by bed, each one showing improvement. Not dramatic, not miraculous overnight healing, but measurable, undeniable, scientific. Private Walsh could lie on his back. For the first time in 2 weeks, he could actually lie flat without screaming. The burns across his back and shoulders had stopped oozing, had stopped smelling like death, had started the slow process of rebuilding what fire had destroyed. Corporal Rivers could turn his head, 30 degrees to the left, 30 degrees to the right. His face was still swollen, still scarred, still terrible to look at, but the infection that had threatened to spread into his brain was gone. The tissue was pink and clean and alive. Private Hayes was trying to make a fist. His electrical burns had damaged nerves as well as tissue. The healing would take longer, might never be complete, but his fingers were moving, curling, responding to signals from his brain. That was something. That was hope. Lieutenant Morrison was eating breakfast, complained that the eggs were cold and the toast was burnt. Crawford laughed when he heard that. Complaining meant living. Complaining meant a future. Complaining meant a man who expected to go home to his wife and 3 kids in Michigan. By mid-morning, the evidence was overwhelming. 6 patients, 6 improvements, 0 complications, 0 setbacks. The honey treatment was working exactly as Elena had said it would. But Fort Bragg was a military installation. And military installations run on protocol and chain of command and proper procedures. What Elena and Crawford were doing, no matter how successful, was outside those boundaries. Word spread anyway. Hospitals are like small towns. Everyone knows everyone else's business. Orderlies talk to nurses, nurses talk to doctors, doctors talk to other doctors. By noon, physicians from other wards were finding excuses to walk past the burn unit, to look through the windows, to see the German prisoner and her impossible honey cure. Some were curious, some were skeptical, some were openly hostile. A woman, a foreigner, an enemy, treating American soldiers with folk remedies. It challenged everything they'd been taught, everything they believed about medicine and science and the proper order of things. Dr. Richardson heard the whispers, the rumors, the growing tide of opinion that maybe, just maybe, there was something to this honey treatment after all. He called another meeting. Crawford, Elena, hospital command, even a visiting colonel from Army Medical Corps headquarters who happened to be at Fort Bragg that week. Conference room, 2 p.m., the same room where Elena had trained the nurses. Now it felt different, more formal, more dangerous. Richardson stood at the front. His face was granite. His eyes were cold. He threw a medical file on the table. The sound echoed in the quiet room. 6 patients, Richardson said. 6 positive responses in 72 hours. I want to know if this is real or if we're seeing spontaneous improvement that would have happened anyway. Crawford stood, pulled out his own files, laid them on the table one by one. These are the infection markers from before treatment began, Crawford said. White blood cell counts, temperature charts, wound cultures showing resistant bacteria. These patients were dying, not might die, not could die. Were dying, medical fact. He laid out another set of files. These are the same markers after 72 hours of honey treatment. White blood cell counts normalizing, temperatures dropping, wound cultures showing decreased bacterial load, infection clearing, new tissue growth beginning. These are not spontaneous improvements. These are treatment responses. The visiting colonel, a man named Foster, leaned forward. His uniform had more ribbons than Elena had ever seen on one chest. Combat veteran, medical administrator, a man who'd seen both war and its aftermath. Dr. Crawford Foster said, his voice measured and careful. Are you telling me that a traditional remedy is outperforming modern antibiotics? I'm telling you that it's working when modern antibiotics have failed, Crawford said. Whether it's outperforming or simply attacking the problem from a different angle, I can't say. But the results are undeniable. Foster turned to Elena. Miss Hoffman, you've treated how many burn cases with this method? 52 during the war, sir. Now 6 more here, 58 total. And how many deaths too? both from burns covering more than 60% of body surface. Unsurvivable regardless of treatment. 96.5% survival rate, Foster said quietly, compared to what Dr. Richardson. What's our current survival rate for similar burns? Richardson's jaw tightened, approximately 73% with standard protocols. So we're talking about a 23.5% improvement in survival, Foster said. That's not margin of error. That's not luck. That's significant. The room went quiet. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't have political opinions or national loyalties. Numbers just were. But there's a problem, Richardson said. We don't know the mechanism. We don't have controlled trials. We don't have peer-reviewed studies. We're basing a treatment protocol on folk wisdom from a German grandmother who's been dead for 6 years. My grandmother died in 1940, Elena said quietly, during an Allied bombing raid on Munich. She was trying to help injured civilians. She died doing what she'd done for 70 years, healing people. Silence again, different this time, uncomfortable. The mechanism doesn't matter if it works, Crawford said. We can study the mechanism later. Right now, soldiers are dying and we have a treatment that saves them. That's what matters, Foster nodded slowly. Continue the treatment. Expand to any burn patient who consents. Full documentation. Hourly observations for the first week. We'll send samples of the honey mixture to Army Medical Corps Research Division. Let them analyze it. Figure out why it works. He looked at Elena. Miss Hoffman, you'll be reassigned from kitchen duty, effective immediately, medical consultant. You'll work with our staff, train them. Document everything you know about this treatment and any other traditional methods that might have military medical applications. Elena's heart jumped. Sir, I am still a prisoner of war, technically, Foster said. But the war's over. We're processing repatriations. And we're also identifying prisoners with valuable skills who might want to stay in the United States. You would qualify. Richardson stood. This is highly irregular. So is a 96% survival rate, Foster said. Irregular wins wars, doctor. Sometimes it saves lives, too. The meeting ended. Elena walked out feeling like the ground had shifted under her feet. 1 week ago, she'd been peeling potatoes. Now she was a medical consultant to the United States Army. Now her grandmother's wisdom was being taken seriously by people who'd spent decades learning to dismiss it. But the real test was still coming. April 16th, 10 days after Elena had first spoken to Crawford. 6 days after beginning treatment on the 5 additional patients, the burn ward had become a place of cautious hope instead of quiet desperation. Men were healing, infections were clearing. The smell of death had been replaced by the smell of honey and herbs and new tissue growing. Then the ambulance arrived. Elena was in the ward changing Morrison's dressing when she heard the commotion. Orderlies running, nurses shouting, the controlled chaos that meant emergency. Trauma. Someone whose time had run out before they even got through the door. They wheeled him past on a gurney. Private Daniel Cooper, 20 years old, from Knoxville, Tennessee. Training accident, fuel tank explosion, and burns. Burns like Elena had rarely seen even during the war. 60% of his body surface. 4th degree in places. Down through skin and muscle into bone. Already in septic shock. Already dying. Multiple organs beginning to fail. Crawford met the gurney, took one look. Elena saw his face change. Saw him recognize what she'd recognized immediately. Some wounds are beyond any medicine. Traditional or modern, some damage is just too extensive for the body to recover from. But Cooper's mother was on her way, driving from Tennessee, 8-hour drive. She'd be there by morning. Crawford found Elena in the hallway. His eyes asked the question before his mouth did. Can you give us time, he asked. Can you give his mother a chance to say goodbye? Elena looked through the window at Cooper, at this boy who was really dying. Not might die, not could die if things went wrong. Was dying, right now, today. Tomorrow at the latest. I will try, she said, but you must prepare his family. This is beyond what honey can fix. I know. Crawford said, but 3 days. Can you give us 3 days? 3 days of fighting. 3 days of applying honey mixture every 8 hours instead of 12. Desperate attempt to slow the infection. To buy time. To give a mother the chance to hold her son's hand one more time. Cooper drifted in and out, sometimes aware, sometimes delirious with fever and pain and morphine. Elena stayed close, changed his dressings, talked to him quietly when he was conscious, told him about Bavaria, about her village, about her grandmother who'd healed people for 70 years. His mother arrived on the 17th, Sarah Cooper, 46 years old, hands rough from farm work, eyes hollow with a fear that had been growing since the telegram arrived, since the phone call came, since she'd gotten in her old Ford truck and driven 8 hours through the night to get to her boy. She sat by his bed, held his hand, one of the few places not burned, talked to him about home, about the farm, about his little sister who missed him, about the dog who still waited by the door every evening, expecting him to come home from work. Elena gave them privacy, but she came every 8 hours to change the dressings, to apply more honey, to do what she could, even though she knew it wasn't enough. On the 19th, just after dawn, Daniel Cooper died. Multiple organ failure. His body just couldn't recover from the massive trauma. Couldn't rebuild what fire had destroyed. No medicine could have saved him. Not Elena's honey, not Crawford's sulfa drugs, not all the medical technology in the world. But he died with his mother holding his hand. Died peacefully, without the screaming agony that septic burns usually bring. The honey had given him that much. 3 days of relative peace while his mother sang him the songs she'd sung when he was little, while she told him she loved him, while she said goodbye. Sarah Cooper found Elena in the hallway afterward. Her eyes were red, her face was wet, but she was calm. The terrible calm of someone who'd done what they came to do. "You're the German woman," Sarah said. "The one who's been treating him?" "Yes, ma'am." "Did you know he was going to die?" "Yes, ma'am. I am so sorry. His injuries were too severe. Nothing could have saved him." Sarah Cooper did something Elena didn't expect. She hugged her. "Just grabbed this enemy woman and held on tight. You gave me 3 more days," Sarah whispered. 3 days I wouldn't have had. 3 days to tell him I loved him, to sing to him, to be there when he passed. She pulled back, looked Elena in the eyes. "Thank you for trying, for giving us that time, for making his last days bearable instead of agony." After Sarah Cooper left, Elena found Crawford in his office, told him about the conversation, about the gratitude that felt heavier than blame would have. "I failed," Elena said. "I couldn't save him." "You gave him 3 days without pain," Crawford said. "You gave his mother 3 days of goodbye. That's not failure, that's mercy. But Dr. Richardson won't see it that way." "No," Crawford admitted. "He won't." The medical board meeting happened the next day. Emergency session, hospital command, senior doctors. Even Colonel Foster, who'd been about to leave Fort Bragg but delayed his departure when he heard. Richardson threw Cooper's file on the table. His face was set, determined. "This patient died under the honey treatment," Richardson said. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Elena, to this German woman sitting in the back, this prisoner who'd convinced them to try something crazy, this enemy who'd promised to save lives and then failed. Elena stood, small German woman in a gray dress facing a room full of decorated American military doctors. But she'd faced worse, had stood in bombed-out hospitals with wounded soldiers bleeding to death around her, had made impossible decisions about who to save and who to let go, had survived a war that had killed 60 million people. She could survive this. Sir Elena said, her accent thick but her voice steady. Private Cooper arrived with burns covering 60% of his body. 4th-degree burns. Already septic. Already dying when the ambulance brought him here. But the treatment didn't save him, Richardson said. No treatment could have saved him, sir. His injuries were unsurvivable. The medical literature is clear on this. Burns covering more than 50% body surface have a mortality rate above 90%, even with the best care. Cooper was beyond that threshold. He was beyond what any medicine could fix. Then why use your honey? Why not standard protocols? Elena's voice dropped. Because standard protocols would have meant 3 days of screaming, 3 days of agony as sepsis consumed him. The honey gave him peace, reduced his pain, gave his mother time to say goodbye properly. That is not failure. That is compassion. The room was absolutely quiet. Crawford stood. "Sam, look at the numbers. Before Miss Hoffman, 15 patients predicted 11 deaths based on infection severity. After honey treatment began 15 patients, 1 death from unsurvivable burns. That's 14 lives saved, Crawford continued. 14 families who got their sons back. 14 soldiers who will go home and live full lives. 1 death doesn't erase 14 miracles. Colonel Foster spoke. His voice was measured. Careful, Dr. Richardson, I appreciate your caution. Medical skepticism serves us well, keeps us from harming patients with untested treatments. But I also appreciate results. He looked around the room. 14 men are alive who wouldn't be. That's not luck. That's not coincidence. That's effective medicine that we didn't know we had. To Elena Foster said Miss Hoffman, the honey treatment will continue with full documentation for medical review. And I'm recommending to Army Medical Corps that you be reassigned permanently. Medical consultant, your knowledge has saved American lives. That's worth more than potato peeling. 2 weeks later, Richardson personally performed the autopsy on Private Cooper. Standard procedure for military deaths. Elena didn't attend, didn't want to see, but Crawford told her the results. Death from multiple organ failure, secondary to massive burns, Crawford said. No evidence the honey treatment contributed to death. In fact, burn sites treated with honey showed less tissue damage than would be expected at this stage of sepsis. Richardson paused outside Elena's new office. Small room, desk, filing cabinet, window looking out at the hospital grounds. Her name on the door in neat black letters. Medical consultant E. Hoffman. Miss Hoffman, Richardson said, I owe you an apology. Elena looked up from her desk, where she'd been writing detailed instructions for honey preparation, training materials for the expanding program. Sir Cooper didn't die from your treatment. He died despite it. The honey actually helped even when nothing could save him. The autopsy proved that. He paused, cleared his throat. And I was wrong about folk medicine. I was wrong about you. I let my prejudices cloud my medical judgment. That's unacceptable in a physician. You were protecting your patients, sir. That is not wrong. That is being a good doctor. Still, Richardson said, I should have listened sooner. Should have given your grandmother's wisdom the respect it deserved. By the end of May, Fort Bragg had treated 67 burn cases with Elena's honey mixture, 64 full recoveries, 3 deaths, all from unsurvivable burns, 95.5% survival rate, compared to the previous 73% with standard treatments alone. The numbers spread through the military medical community like wildfire. Letters went out to other Army hospitals. Requests came in for training, for samples of the honey mixture, for Elena herself to travel and teach. By June, Colonel Foster called Elena to his office again. This time the meeting was different, warmer. He gestured for her to sit, offered her coffee. Real coffee, not the burnt chicory blend from the mess hall. Miss Hoffman Foster said the Army Medical Corps wants to formalize this, study your methods, implement them across military hospitals. They've asked me to change your status. Sir, you'll work with our medical staff full-time, teaching, documenting, researching other traditional methods you might know. You'll be given quarters in the staff housing instead of the POW barracks, paid as a civilian contractor. I am still technically a prisoner, Elena said carefully. Technically, Foster agreed. But the war is over. Germany has surrendered. We're beginning repatriation for prisoners who want to return home. And we're offering work visas to those with valuable skills who wish to stay. He paused. You would qualify for the latter, if you're interested. Elena thought about Germany, about ruins and ashes, about a village that might not exist anymore, about family scattered or dead, about a country that had lost everything. Then she thought about this hospital, these soldiers, this work. Her grandmother's voice clear as a bell. A healer serves life, not nations. I would like to stay, sir, and continue helping. Foster smiled. Welcome to Fort Bragg medical staff, Miss Hoffman. The years passed in a blur of teaching and documenting and saving lives. 1946 became 47. Elena traveled to veterans hospitals across the country, trained medical personnel at a dozen military bases, wrote detailed protocols translating 300 years of oral tradition into written medical procedure. Army Medical Corps began formal studies, laboratory analysis of the honey mixture, chemical testing, Controlled trials comparing honey treatment to standard burn care. Every study confirmed what Elena already knew. It worked. By 1948, honey-based wound care was standard treatment in military hospitals nationwide. By 1949, civilian hospitals were adopting the protocols. Medical journals published papers. Universities began research programs. The scientific community, skeptical at first, was forced to admit that traditional medicine had valuable lessons to teach. December 1949, Federal Courthouse, Fayetteville, North Carolina. Elena Hoffman stood before a judge, 37 years old now, no longer wearing a gray prison dress but a proper suit borrowed from Nurse O'Brien. Dr. Crawford and Dr. Richardson stood beside her as witnesses. Colonel Foster sat in the gallery smiling. The judge was an older man, kind eyes. He'd seen plenty of naturalization ceremonies, but this one was special. Miss Hoffman, the judge, said you came to this country as a prisoner of war. Why do you wish to become an American citizen? Elena had practiced this answer, had thought about it for weeks. But when the moment came, she spoke from her heart. Because America listened when I spoke, she said. Because doctors here valued knowledge over nationality, trusted results over prejudice. Here I saved lives. 200 soldiers who would have died, they lived because this country was willing to learn from an enemy prisoner. She paused, emotion rising. In Germany, I was just a nurse. My grandmother's wisdom was dismissed as folklore. But here, when I shared what I knew, people tested it, learned from it, used it to help others. That is why I want to be American. Because this country values contribution over origin. The judge signed the papers. Welcome to the United States citizen. Elena took the certificate with trembling hands. Dr. Crawford hugged her. Richardson shook her hand formally but with genuine warmth. Foster congratulated her. Welcome home, Crawford said. Thank you, Elena whispered. Thank you for listening when you could have dismissed me. Thank you for speaking up when you could have stayed silent. The work continued. 1952, Elena completed an accelerated medical degree through a special military program, became Dr. Elena Hoffman officially, stood before rooms full of military medical officers presenting research on traditional healing methods. By then, 1,847 burn cases had been treated with her protocols, 1,809 recoveries, 38 deaths, all from unsurvivable injuries, 97.9% survival rate, over 400 soldiers alive who would have died. 1976, Walter Reed Army Medical Center. Dr. Elena Hoffman died peacefully in her sleep. 64 years old, 30 years with the Army Medical Corps, had trained thousands of medical personnel, published 40 papers, changed how an entire nation thought about traditional medicine. Her funeral was attended by over 300 people. Soldiers she'd saved, doctors she'd trained, medical researchers she'd inspired. Crawford gave the eulogy, 83 years old now, retired. But he'd traveled from North Carolina to Washington just to say goodbye. Elena Hoffman came to America as an enemy, Crawford said. She left this world as a hero. She taught me that expertise exists everywhere, that the person we overlook might be the genius we need. That knowledge doesn't care about nationality or credentials or status. He paused, voice thick with emotion. She showed us that sometimes the answers we need have been waiting for centuries, just waiting for someone brave enough to share them, and someone humble enough to listen. Today in 2024, the Elena Hoffman Center for Integrative Medicine stands at Walter Reed. Glass walls, herb gardens growing calendula and comfrey and plantain. Nearly 50 years of operation. Documented traditional healing methods from 63 countries. Published over 2,000 research papers. Trained 4 generations of military medical personnel. Saved an estimated 50,000 lives through burn treatment protocols alone. There's a bronze plaque in the entrance hall. Medical students read it every day. Some dismiss it as history. Others see it as an urgent reminder. In April 1946, Elena Hoffman was a German prisoner of war. She saw American soldiers dying. She spoke up. She shared her grandmother's knowledge. Dr. William Crawford listened. Together, they revolutionized burn treatment. This center honors their legacy. Expertise exists everywhere. Wisdom comes from unexpected sources. Knowledge has no nationality. Elena's honey treatment is still used worldwide. Combat medics carry honey-based wound dressings. Burn centers use honey protocols as first-line treatment. Third world hospitals rely on it when modern medicine isn't available. All because one woman refused to stay silent when she saw soldiers dying. All because one doctor was humble enough to listen to an enemy. All because knowledge, real knowledge, doesn't care about borders or credentials or status. It just works. And somewhere in a village outside Munich that no longer exists, a grandmother who died in 1940 during an Allied bombing raid would be proud. Her wisdom didn't die with her, didn't disappear into the ashes of war, lived on through her granddaughter's courage and an American doctor's humility. 300 years of accumulated knowledge, passed down through women's hands, through whispered recipes, through clay jars and wooden spoons and love, still saving lives today. Still proving that the most important breakthroughs sometimes come from the most unexpected places. Still reminding us to listen, to learn, to honor the voices others ignore. Because you never know when the enemy in the kitchen might be the genius who saves your life.